Welcome back to the BoshNRoll channel. Today, I am back from Italy. I've been back for about 11 hours at the time of this recording, and it's time to talk about Eternal Week in Italy in my tournament report for this. If this is your first tournament report with me, what I do is I post round by round on social media when I'm playing, and then I just read through my posts and do my best to recall what I can recall about each match along the way. This event was in Lucca, Italy, run by Four Seasons and Booze. I think it was a collaboration. I think Booze might be Paupergeddon, Four Seasons, Eternal Weekend, and they ran them together, or maybe they were just both together. I don't know all the behind the scenes details, but what I'm trying to say is they did a really good job. The venue was really big. There was a lot to do. They had a clear schedule of things that you could join, and great judging staff, great tournament staff. Everyone was very helpful. Everything, you knew where you needed to be and when and everything. That was all great. And they did something I've never seen before, which I hope changes the game forever and everyone starts doing this, which is prize wall tickets could be spent anywhere in the venue. And what that means is there is a prize wall, as we've all grown to expect at these large Wizards of the Coast run events, where you could spend your prize wall tickets that you win in events on packs or big cards or whatever. But they also had a conversion rate of 5 tickets is €4. And you could spend those €4 at vendors. Like if you found something you liked at 3-for-1 trading and you walked over and said, I need €20 for 3-for-1 trading, they would take €25 out of your, or 25 tickets out of your account, give you a €20 voucher for 3-for-1 trading, then you could go spend actual money there. And what's even more busted is you could do the same thing for food. They had an incredible selection of food trucks there for the entire 4 days. The food was good. There were many options. It was affordable. And especially, it was the same rate. 5 tickets is €4, and you could make an exchange and get like a poker chip that said like €5 or €10 on it and walk it out to the food trucks and then buy food with your prize wall tickets. Completely insane. Change the game. I hope everyone does this forever. As for me playing the events themselves, let's get into that. Vintage was first. Team Trios was first. I did that on Thursday. I teamed with Justin Gennari and Andrea Piemonte. I played Legacy, Gennari played Vintage, and Piemonte played Pauper, and we won a bye. We finished in the top 4 teams, and we each got to pick a buy for an event over the weekend that we got to apply, and I applied mine to Vintage. This is the deck I played. There is a snuff out behind my camera, but you can see everything else. This is just Dimir Lurrus, pretty normal stuff here. After getting smoked at Eternal Weekend America with Jeskai Lurrus PO, I wanted stability. And PO's obviously great. The deck keeps putting up numbers. It did ultimately, a PO deck did win this tournament I'm about to talk about in the hands of Zio Francone. And my issue is the raw power versus the reduced variance, where sometimes you just pair into Hollowvine, and that matchup is very difficult to win. Or sometimes you have a hand that has no Moxen and 2 POs in it, and then you have to mulligan that. It has kind of the Oath problem, where sometimes you just have 3 Atraxas in your hand and no way to put them into play. And PO is a easier to work with card than Atraxa if it's in your hand. You could find something to do with that eventually, but it does require the things to move together in a way. It is a synergy-driven deck, where sometimes you just won't have any Moxes in your hand, and then it's bad. And I didn't really want to do that again. So I just went plain, simple, good mana, consistent experience, make everyone play Legacy with me. The decisions I made in this deck that aren't unheard of, but aren't necessarily stock. I'm playing 2 Thoughtseize, which is a card that is obviously great. Doesn't need an introduction after existing for 17, 18 years. Thoughtseize has been with us in the Magic world. Immediately established itself as the best discard spell ever printed. That's still true now. It would be hard to improve on the rate of Thoughtseize, but let it take lands or you don't lose 2 life. Like, they basically made this card as good as it could possibly be on this one. all the way back in Lorwyn. And the Thoughtseize is nice. I'm going to try to explain what I like about Thoughtseize without just reading the card Thoughtseize to you, because obviously you get to see their hand and take something out of it. That's literally the text of the card. But when you see your opponent's hand with a deck like this one, where it's like, I have a Spell Pierce, do I hold that up? I have a Daze, will that ever be good? Should I pitch Daze to Force of Will, or should I pitch a different blue card to Force and then Daze something else? Is that ever going to line up? Do I need to aggressively use my graveyard for a dig through time now before I lose it to something like Soul Guide Lantern later? Or should I save those cards for potential Lurrus down the road? There's a bunch of pathways. Should I Wasteland aggressively or save it for an Urza Saga? And all of that context is just laid bare when you get to see your opponent's hand. The card Gataxian Probe, also featured in this deck. You're only allowed to play one, and that's the number I'm playing. And it always feels like cheating when you just get to look at your opponent's hand at the start of the game, and then you get to know everything that needs to happen. Thoughtseize is like that, but instead of replacing itself with a random card from your deck, you get to take a card of your choice from their hand, and tripling the amount of times I can look at my opponent's hand in a game and then build a plan around it felt really good. Plus, some of the weak points of Dimir Lurrus are the Jeskai PO deck I just mentioned, because if they get 3 lands under them and they're not worried about Null Rod, and they could start casting Stock Up, and then into Stock Up, into Thundertrap Trainer, into PO, they have so many 2-for-1s, and if you could just take one on a 1-for-1 basis where you don't have to Force of Will it and give them a 2-for-1 anyway, that just becomes really good. Oath is also a tough matchup for this deck because you need to put a creature into play to win, and Oath of Druids punishes that. If you can take the Oath or make a plan to navigate the Oath or whatever with a Thoughtseize, that just does a lot. These 2 slots showing up a lot of tough matchups. Also, like, versus White Initiative, which is a close matchup and can break based on whether you know you're supposed to Force of Will their Mox Ruby or their payoff. Now you know, and it's just that easy. So I really liked the Thoughtseize. I was happy every single time I drew them throughout the tournament. The other thing I'm doing is Wanshi Tong Librarian. I'll toggle over to the actual deck building website instead of just this image. Wanshi Tong, this is new from Avatar. Blue X, Flash, Flying, Vigilance. When it enters, put X+1 counters on it and draw half X cards rounded down. Whenever an opponent searches their library, put a +1 counter on Wanshi Tong and draw a card. This card is blue. This card is a mana sink in a deck where games can go long. This card has evasion, which means it can challenge the initiative. It's a 2-drop just on the numbers, and fetch lands, demonic tutors, all these things trigger it. Urza Saga's going off. And I've seen lists where they have 4 Wanshi Tong and they're really just going for it. They've done some top 8s in the early Magic Online challenges with Avatar Legal. I don't know about that approach, to be determined, but it felt like a card worth exploring at least a little bit. Because there are matchups where Orcish Bowmaster is just not very good. That's matchups like Oath, which is one of our bad matchups. And if I can increase my blue count density while increasing my card draw in a matchup that's bad, that sounds pretty sweet. Unfortunately, this doesn't work with Lurrus the way we'd like. You can cast it for blue with Lurrus, but if you make X even 1, now it costs 3. Because you have to announce your spell before you pay for it. And if you announce you're intending to cast a 3-drop or 4-drop with X equals 1 or 2, then the game says you're not allowed to do that with Lurrus. That is just how it works. That's different than Thundertrap Trainer, because Thundertrap Trainer always has mana value 2, and then it has an additional cost of Kicker, and paying an additional cost on top of the mana value is different than X, which actually changes the mana value. So Wanshi Tong does not work with Lurrus the way we'd like, but it does keep coming back if you just need a blocker every turn. My experience playing this card, I only cast it twice. One time, it clipped a fetch land, I drew a card, then my opponent cast Demonic Tutor, I drew another card, and then it traded off for a removal spell. So pretty good rate, all in all, a 3-for-1 for that guy. And the other time it came up was in a really tight game versus Dredge, where I flashed it in for 4 mana, drew a card, chump blocked a hollow 1, and then was able to just tread water and stabilize. And that was one of the important turns along the way. So card was fine. It'll be a fun one to explore how much of this should really be going on, and in metagames where is it better than Bowmaster? I could see 2 and 2, 3 and 1 the other way. I don't think I believe in 4 and 0 for once you're talking no Bowmaster, unless you just don't want to be a Dimir deck. But then you lose Psychic Frog, and what's the point? I think Psychic Frog is really the point of a deck like this. This is what we're actually doing here. So, like, it's not like cutting Bowmasters frees you up a color. I think they'll continue to be a split moving forward. Let's talk about the matches themselves. The BoshNRoll channel is brought to you by Tales of Adventure. TOAMagic.com has almost 100,000 unique cards in stock. They offer free track shipping on every order, plus next day or 2-day options when you have an event coming up fast. They offer on-site pickup at major Magic events throughout the US, so you're never scrambling before your tournament. Stop by their booth to buy, sell, or trade at upcoming regional championships, Magic Con, Spotlight Series, and more. I love their selection of individually scanned high-end cards that show you exactly what you're buying. And the best part is saving 5% on every order with promo code BOSH. From Ancestral Recall to Zombie Master, get what you need quickly and in one place at TOAMagic.com. Eternal lives here. For the tournament itself, here's a picture of the hall. It basically goes on just for infinity, and it's wall-to-wall people. And you would think, wow, what a huge venue, and it's packed. They're doing great. But this wasn't even the room Vintage was in. That was a different full room upstairs. There were so many people here. I've already ranted and raved a little bit about how great the event was, but I think it was also really smart attaching Paupergeddon to Eternal Weekend. It just brought more Eternal players. Like, Pauper is a full-fledged Eternal format, and thinking anything less because it's a budget format or whatever is just dismissive of the gameplay. I mean, not that I've heard anyone make that assertion. I'm just saying, don't forget that Pauper is a full-fledged, fully deserved, capital E Eternal format. And there's just so many people and Pauper players who like Legacy but can't afford it, or people who can't afford Vintage but do play Legacy, had something to do on the earlier days. Just so awesome to have so many people there, all enjoying playing non-rotating Constructed. As I said before, I want to buy the day before, 1-0 in this 9-round event. Round 1, I played against Lurrus PO, and we had a crazy back and forth Vintage game. It was one of these games where it's like, Force of Will, your important spell. Then I top deck Ancestral Recall, but you top deck Stock Up. And then we just like thugged back and forth, like giant hammer fists going back and forth for 2 games. And then in game 3, I had a clutch Thoughtseize that showed me my opponent was on the play. They went Tundra Go. And in my upkeep, they cast Ancestral Recall, which resolved. I didn't have a counter spell. But I had Mox Jet, Thoughtseize, and then the option to develop a blue card of some kind or wasteland them. And my Thoughtseize saw their hand of now all the extra cards because Ancestral Recall resolved. It didn't have another land, and it didn't have a counter spell in it. So I was able to take, I forget what I took, but it was something, whatever the best card was given the circumstances. Then I wastelanded the Tundra, and then I passed. And my opponent played out an off-color Mox. I think they had like Ruby Emerald in play, which are not the colors that their deck really is. And then they passed back, and I resolved a Null Rod, and which I knew my opponent couldn't counter. But I did know there was a portable hole in hand, so this isn't going to hold forever. I just have to draw a counter spell before they draw a white source. And then they go to their turn, discard to hand size, and then I play like some threat or something. And then they go draw Tolarian Academy, tap Tolarian Academy. The one unknown card in their hand is Time Walk. And even there, I'm like, okay, Academy sucks, but this still doesn't really get them out of it. I play Wastelands, I play Counterspells, I'll figure it out. Then the Time Walk turn, they draw and play Tundra, then Portable Hole my Null Rod, that just kill me. And it was, a Vintage moment. Not mad about it, just Tolarian Academy was literally the only card in their deck that mattered there. Because even a land that does one thing isn't enough to get them all out of it. And the Academy pushed them over the edge into doing enough. But yeah, that was just a crazy top deck where all 3 games were like that. but I ended up on the wrong side of it. Round 3, I lost to Bug Lurrus. This is Max Dorshan's deck that he top forward the US Eternal Weekend with. It's basically my deck, but they splash green for Collector Oof and Deathrite Shaman. Collector Oof, I obviously don't care about at all. That's mostly blank cardboard in this mirror match, pseudo mirror, but Deathrite Shaman is very good if it gets active. We went back and forth the first 2 games. There was one really interesting decision that when games are so close, if you go back and do the analysis, you could find spots where sometimes you make a decision on like a 49-51% line, and you just end up in 49% world, and it's like, okay, I made the decision, or it could even be 50-50. It could be just dead even. What do I think is more likely that's going to happen now, like based on context clues, because based on lists, it's one or the other. And this was the match where my Wan Shi Tong clipped a fetch land, clipped a mnemonic tutor, and then was in play as a 3/3. And the next turn in combat, the board state is my opponent has a Psychic Frog that is a 1/2. I have a Psychic Frog that's a 1/2, and I have Wan Shi Tong that's a 3/3. I have Force of Will blue card in my hand, and my opponent has whatever they just demonic tutored for, which in my head, it's probably Ancestral Recall or a removal spell. And because they're green, they could have access to Abrupt Decay. And Fatal Push is the default removal spell. Ancestral Recall is always just a nice thing to grab off of Demonic Tutor in a close game. But they did see the Wan Shi Tong because they fetched and then played Demonic Tutor both into Wan Shi Tong, so they knew it was there, and it would also make sense in that spot to try to solve that problem with your tutor. And for Psychic Frog, it's important that we both have the same number of cards in hand. And my opponent attacks with Psychic Frog, I double block, because these Dimir Lurrus matchups are just about Psychic Frog. And if I can get my opponent's Frog out of play, everything else, we can still figure it out. And even if my opponent discards his whole hand, I will get to keep either my Frog or my Wan Shi. And we get to a spot where, I double block. Opponent discards 1 card. Now Frog is 1/2. I discard 1 card. It's a Mox Sapphire. And then my opponent discards a 3rd card. And then I just pass priority on that one because my hand is Force Blue card. And I'm like, okay, I still get the combat I want here. Their Frog is dead and they can pick which one of my creatures to kill. And I can protect it with a counterspell. And opponent's card in hand that I presume they tutored for was Abrupt Decay. So they were able to decay my Frog before damage, and then their 3/4 Frog killed my Wan Shi Tong, so they had Frog and I had nothing. And the mistake there is discarding the Mox, because the combat that I want, which is kill their Frog and lose one of my things of their choice, happens whether I discard that Mox or not. And if they've tutored for Fatal Push, it doesn't matter because I have Force of Will. If they tutored for Abrupt Decay, I'm discarding a card for no reason because they will win the combat no matter what in that case. But we were at a point in the game where I had a bunch of mana and it's just like the Mox seemed extra. But then like 2 turns later, the game ended up in a spot where I could cast Lurrus, but I only had 1 mana up. And I had a graveyard full of Psychic Frogs, Orcish Bowmasters, Momentum Breaker, like all of the good 2-drops. The Wan Shi Tong was in the graveyard, of course, because that's where it goes when it gets killed. And that turn, if I had 1 more mana, e.g. the Mox I discarded, I would have stabilized instead of just having to pass with Lurrus and hope it was there while Frog takes another chunk out of me. And I ended up just behind in this really tight match where every card ended up mattering. And just something like that, the being able to play 3 games 3 long games where both players make a ton of decisions, go back and forth in a vintage power level game. And the spot where I lost the game ultimately came down to not doing the combat math correctly and discarding a Mox Sapphire when I already had 4 mana. Actually was the turning point. And sucks to lose. Dead for top 8 in round 3, despite having a bye in round 1. It's a tough place to be. But at least being able to find the spot where I messed up feels good. Round 4, I played against a mono black scam. That's the default unpowered deck in Vintage right now. It's quite strong. And my opponent came out guns blazing in game 1. And I had to fight through a bunch of creatures, a bunch of discards, but this one of Momentum Breaker in my deck killed 5 creatures and gained over 10 life over the course of game 1. It was like, play Momentum Breaker, kill your Orc army, because you get free money off of that one when you play Orcish Bowmaster. Sack Momentum Breaker, gain 2 life, buy Lurrus, play Lurrus. At one point in the mid-game, I had to take a hit from Barrogoyf and just hope that it didn't flip anything too deadly, and it didn't. And then I was able to break my opponent's momentum every turn of the game after that. And that was a really sick fight back. I don't really remember game 2. I suspect it was less interesting once you board out all the bad cards and have the good ones. My opponent was a really nice person, a fan of the channel, and he was, after our match, he was like, "I'm so glad I got to play against you. I was hoping I would." And I was like, "Cool. Are you playing Legacy? Maybe I'll play you tomorrow." And he was like, "No, 1 is enough. Thank you." And it was just a fun interaction. Round 5, I played against Dredge, which is always a close matchup. One of the appeals of the Dimir Lurrus decks and Esper Lurrus, all the Lurrus variants, is that they could beat Dredge in game 1. You have 5 Wastelands in your deck, the Strip Mine plus the 4 Wastelands to fight Bazaar. You have the ability to go bigger than their hollow ones with Psychic Frog. Lurrus can grind them out. We have main deck Soul Guide Lantern, main deck Vexing Bauble, both of which are good against Bazaar strategies, and the ability to tutor them with Saga or Demonic, and the ability to loop them with Lurrus. You can really get there as long as they don't go too crazy on you. My opponent kept 7 all 3 games, and game 1 I mostly just got run over. As I remember, game 2 I was able to fend it off with some Wastelands and stuff. And the last game, this was one of those kind of, I guess it's not my day kind of moments, where I took my opponent off of Bazaar. I was at 9 life. They were slow dredging, which means just once per turn in their draw step, they just dredge whatever the biggest dredger in their graveyard is and hope it matters, because they can't really make any other decisions at that point. And opponent had 2 Icarids and enough black creatures to keep them going and do 9 to me. And they had 2 Creeping Chills left in their deck. And their deck probably had like 25, 30 cards about halfway through the deck. And there was a turn where I bought Lurrus, like put it in my hand, and then passed and replicated a consignment memory to counter their 2 Icarid triggers in their upkeep. And I have to make that decision before I see what's in the graveyard, because upkeep happens before draw. That's just the rules of the game. And I basically just used that as time walk. And then they took a Dredge 5 off of Stingweedum, which hit a 3rd Icarid. So now I'm at 9, looking at 3 Icarids in their graveyard. And on my turn, I play out Lurrus. I don't have graveyard hate in the graveyard to get it back. And I just have to pass back. I think I had a Mishra's Bauble or some small thing for value. And I'm still okay as long as they don't now slow dredge a Creeping Chill. But they did. So it was like, now dredge 4 and Creeping Chill got you, bring back the 3 Icarids, do exactly enough damage. Maybe I'm not remembering that because speaking through that, Lifelink would have washed it out if I just jumped with Lurrus. Maybe I bought Lurrus that turn and just had to hope that they didn't hit Creeping Chill. Yeah, I think there was a Psychic Frog in play. Sorry, I'm doing my best with these. Happened a few days ago. I had a Psychic Frog in play that I left back to block one of the 3 Icarids. And then next turn, Lurrus would come down and completely lock it up. Yes, that's what's happened. Sorry. I needed to fade creeping chill on. So I needed to fade the third Icarid or one creeping chill on the last draw. And then I needed to fade another one exactly creeping chill on this draw. And opponent was able to convert both in the correct order and deal exactly 20 damage to me over the course of the game. So if I have one more life, if I develop Lurrus one turn earlier, if I have one more blocker, if I have one more removal spell, if my opponent dredges just a little worse, just all of these things, just tiny little thin margins. And I'm not salting off, that's just magic. But just like my opponent having the Tolarian Academy into Time Walk, into White Source, into Portable Hole, all the way back in round 2 is like, okay, yep, all of the exact things that happened to beat me here just happened, and that's magic. You got me. Then I played against Lurrus PO again. I was already there, and even though I'm dead for everything at X3, at least pretty sure I am, the playing on, you don't get to play Paper Vintage that often, and also the MTG ELO project counts Eternal Weekend, so I want to do what I can to protect those numbers. I'm going to be honest, looking at this post right now, I have no idea what happened in this match. My note is I had a close one break my way instead. So there was probably some moment where it was like, the dust is settled, please let me draw something good before my opponent does, and it must have gone my way. Oh, it's starting to come back to me. This one, yeah, I won game 1 in this one, which is nice because it's a bad matchup and getting game 1 before your Nords come in is great. And then game 2, my opponent kept a hand with no Mox in, but I kept a hand with 2 Wastelands and then drew another one. And the first 3 turns of the game were land drop, waste you, land drop, waste you, land drop, waste you. And I had Thoughtseized or Probed, so I knew he didn't have any more lands. Like the third one was it. And then his next 3 draws were lands. It was like draw, Sacred to Stupor as a land, draw, Tundra, Thundertrap Trader, draw, Volcanic Island, and we're off, stock up. So my opponent did have a sick run good in the middle of that one. And then game 3, I was able to turn it back. And I remember this one being a lot more dynamic, but I don't remember the details. Sorry, opponent. Round 7, I played against White Initiative. I didn't know until after the match, but they were unpowered. And I think I played this game extremely well, and it was made possible by Thoughtseize. I had the combo of Mishra's Bobble you to know the top of your deck, and then Thoughtseize you, so I can see your whole hand and what you're going to draw next turn. Like, doing it in that order actually matters. And my opponent's hand was like 2 Ancient Tombs, a Witch Enchanter, and then 4 payoffs, like Archon of Emiria's, White Plume Adventurer, Seas of Dungeoneers, whatever. And if I hadn't bobbled them, I would just take Witch Enchanter and hope that they don't have any white mana. But I knew that they were drawing Chrome Mox for turn. And I was like in the tank on this Thoughtseize, and opponent made some comment about like, the top card of my deck must be good if you're thinking this hard. And I was like, yes, it's basically the best draw in your deck. And we had a laugh about that. And I think I ended up taking White Plume Adventurer, so at least the initiative's not running. And I was able to, with the information I got from that turn 1 Thoughtseize plus Bobble, really cleanly navigate taking them off exactly enough mana, or the colored source, or take the Ancient Tomb on the turn where they're threatening Seasoned Dungeoneer, take the colored source on the turn that they're threatening a removal spell. And it was like, just completely pick them apart. And I think at one point I let something resolve when I could have interacted with it because I knew they had a bigger threat coming. Like if I hadn't seen their hand, I would have just snapped off my Force or my Fatal Push or whatever it was I had. But because I had seen it, I was able to do it another way. And that I remember that game being very cool, although not specifically all the details. I remember game 2 being less close. I think I just boarded in my good cards and picked them apart. Round 8, I played against Dredge again. This opponent, unlike my last one who kept 7 all 3 games, mulled to 3 game 1 and 5 game 2. But the 3 on the play in game 1 was like Bazaar, Loot, discard a bunch of dredgers, play Hollow One, pass. So I'm like under the gun against Bazaar, against Hollow One, and their graveyard was pretty good. Like it was a pretty good 3, plus the 2 cards you get to see. But I was able to navigate it. I think I was able to, because they started on the play with a Serum Powder, so I knew they were dredge from the start with mulligan decisions, and I'm pretty sure I mulliganed into like Wasteland plus the one of Soul Guide Lantern was just there. So I was able to collapse the engine pretty quickly, and then once I got Hollow One under control, it was okay. But that's still a lot to manage from a mold of 3. And then game 2 went really long. We had this really cool spot where, again, my opponent had an early Hollow One. I blew up their Bazaar. I Soul Guide Lantern them at one point to take their whole graveyard away. And now basically the board state was their Hollow One and them drawing a random card every turn versus me trying to get ahead of the Hollow One before they get either draw a Bazaar or draw a Force of Will to protect their Hollow One, because it was actually really close. And it got to a spot where I think I was at 7 life and I bought Lurrus for turn and passed. My opponent hit me with Hollow One down to 3. And by this point, they were up to 8 cards in hand and were able to discard Golgari Grave Troll to hand size. So now they have a Dredge 6 live. And I have to now think about what all that means and not just about the board. And I have Lurrus and I have Momentum Breaker in my graveyard. This can kill the Hollow One, but I don't have enough mana to sacrifice the Momentum Breaker to gain life in case their Dredge 6 hits a Creeping Chill and kills me from exactly 3. So I have to make the decision to roll the dice against Creeping Chill or sacrifice Lurrus. The other play is play Lurrus with the intent to chump block Hollow One, play Soul Guide Lantern out of my graveyard, which takes out the Grave Troll, which will time walk them. They just have to go to cleanup again. And then the Grave Troll or the Lantern will be in play when they go to hand size discard again, and then slow dredge again, and then I can Soul Guide Lantern at any point in the future that it matters. So the Soul Guide Lantern is like 3 time walks, maybe 4 time walks. It really depends on how well they dredge after that point. But I lose Lurrus to do this. But I think they had 3 Creeping Chills left in like a 30 card deck, where like the decision of run the math. I don't know, like what is the chance that they hit that versus definitely don't die, but maybe not have a plan moving forward. And at that point, I decided my tolerance for risk was 0. So I played Lurrus, I played Soul Guide Lantern, exiled the Grave Troll, jumped with Lurrus, went up to 6 life. On the next turn, I was able to find Urza Saga, which I played, and then I jump with Lurrus, go to 6, they discard Stinkweed Imp from hand. I play Urza Saga, I pass, opponent dredges 5 and hits Creeping Chill, which I'm able to Soul Guide Lantern away so the trigger doesn't resolve. And then I take 4 back down to 2, and then the next turn my Saga constructs are bigger than Hollow One, and I'm just winning at that point. So I thought that line was really cool. I played around and out. That involved a really big sacrifice, like my Lurrus. That's the name of the deck. It's called Dimir Lurrus. That's what I'm trying to get to. And it was like, is really the best she's going to do is gain me 7 life and play a Soul Guide Lantern, but that's what I needed there, and I would have lost that game if I didn't make that play, so that felt pretty awesome. And then in the final round, I was paired into White Initiative again, and I have no memory of this game. It must not have been particularly cool. I assume they played some lock pieces or some threats, and I fended them off and then stuck a frog and turned it around. That's usually how that matchup goes if I'm winning it. And I was X3. I was like 72nd going into this round, which means I was not going to make top 32, even if everybody played. But the X2s had all figured out that they could just draw into the promo and make top 32 anyway. So I ended up well outside of top 32, missing the promo by 1 point. 6-2-1 gets the promo. I was 6-3. So 1 match point anywhere. gets me in there. It was but by this point, it's like 6 hours after I had taken my third loss and I'd completed a run back. It would feel terrible to be 6-2 and lose and get nothing. Feels pretty great to be 2-3 and run off a bunch in a row. So I'm still happy with that result. I'm happy with the deck. I mentioned the flex thoughts already. That's Wan Shi Tong, that's Thoughtseize, that's Momentum Breaker. I do like this deck. I like it in an open field where you get to try to outplay people in long games, and that's what I want out of a deck. So good chance I run this back in Japan. That is, if I'm allowed to play the Vintage event, because Haruyuya booked Legacy Eternal Weekend on top of Vintage Eternal Weekend. If you day 2 Legacy, you cannot play Vintage. They booked 3 days worth of events in 2 days, which I think is honestly just outrageously disrespectful to everyone who wants to play in this tournament. Much has been said. Sorry for this side tangent, but there was a lot of complaining about Eternal Weekend Europe the last 2 years, which is why a new TO has it now. But all of the issues with the European one, like the food on the venue isn't that accessible, or it took like 8 months for them to mail out the playmats that they were supposed to give out on the day of the tournament. There was a lot of dumb shit, but you were able to play in both tournaments, which ultimately is what I care about. And I'm honestly really mad that I booked a trip to Japan to find out 2 months after I had made my booking, when they announced the tournament structure, that I just can't play in both. I think they're fucking that up really bad, and they should feel really bad about it, and everyone should be really mad about it. But that's to be talked about in the future. If I get to play in that tournament in Japan, I'm likely to run back something very similar to this. I was very happy with the deck, and as we talked about, my losses were close. Some of them were like, don't hit exactly 2 of the correct cards on a slow dredge over the next 2 turns, and it happened. Or don't draw exactly Tolarian Academy into Time Walk White Source right now, and that happened. It's so thin, and you got to be okay with that. And I found a mistake against that Bugler's player where I discarded a card I didn't need to, which actually ended up mattering. A couple, like tight matches where perfect rips took me out, and also a game in the mix where I made a decision that wasn't good. Like, this was not a 50-50 decision that went bad. This was just wrong. This was just, I did not do the combat math correctly and lost because of it. Can't blame the deck for that one. That's a 6-3 result, 1 point out of the promo. And now let's talk about Legacy.
This video is sponsored by Moxfield.com, the easiest way to build Magic decks online. Moxfield supports over 30 formats, including Legacy and everything else you'll see on this channel. There's multiple customizations so you can interact with your deck how you want. Views such as text, grid, or stacks. And groupings like type, subtype, color identity, even artist. The site offers light mode, dark mode, and so much more. However you want to see your deck, Moxfield can provide it for you. Follow my Moxfield to keep up with the channel and what I'm playing in paper. I'll see you there.
The Legacy main event was a 2-day event, 8 rounds on day 1. People with a record of 6-2 or better get to show up for day 2. This is a lovely panoramic of the hall with, again, my head in the way. There I go. I disappeared. Huge hall full of people. I'm back. It ended up being 960 something players, which was actually bigger than the US Eternal Weekend. Shout out to Four Seasons for making this an event people want to go to. Also shout out to Wizards of the Coast for banning some cards and making the format more exciting to play. 2 big factors getting these great numbers. My deck. I should talk about that. I played Dimir Reanimator, the deck that Wizards just banned. Fun. What a twist. Here is the deck on Moxfield.com. Basically what what we as a Magic community figured out is that Tamio's still here. She's still nutso, and the things that you have to play instead of Entomb now, like Careful Study or Tainted Indulgence or Roiling Dragonstorm, all also flip Tamio, which means the Reanimator deck went from a Reanimator combo deck that backdoors Tamio into a Tamio control deck that backdoors Reanimator. and you can build anywhere you want along that spectrum. There is a series coming out on my channel where I work on this deck. I've already posted a 5.0 with a really early proto version of the deck that had 4 careful studies, 3 of each monster, 4 show and tell in the sideboard, 4 days, just really trying to test if we could still do this. And the answer is yes, we could still do this, but I didn't like those play patterns. I thought the sideboard was mapped poorly, and I worked with a bunch of people, including Builderburn, who is the person who first put up that 5.0 that I copied and then also 5.0'd with. And then I talked to Pokemoki, Eco Baronin, HJ Godic, Death from Above, Michael Reed. There's tons of excellent players who have experience in this space. And we got to a list that I'm really excited about. And throughout the last week before this event, I was playing and recording and iterating on this list. So there are, I think, 4 more videos coming out where I play this deck, and each time you see it change as I try new things, and it gets a little better and a little closer to the final shell. But those will trickle out over the next 4 or 5 weeks. And I've never played the same deck that many times on the channel in such a short period of time, but I'm hoping the iteration process and it being a relevant meta deck in the new post-ban world make it so that content is exciting, even though it's the same deck over and over again. The important things about this version of this deck: no careful study is one of them. Tainted Indulgence, Roiling Dragonstorm are the looting abilities. Bitter Triumph can discard a monster. Brainstorm and Ponder can work alongside your 2 Undercity Sewers and pile of fetch lands to manipulate Surveils to get monsters into the graveyard that way. You can also Thoughtseize yourself. You can also discard to hand size, which Tamiyo helps with. Or if your hand just looks like that and you're on the draw, you could just skip your first turn to get a monster into the graveyard, a play that I made more than once at Eternal Weekend. My issue with Careful Study, even though it is the most efficient way to do the thing game 1, is I want to be able to pivot in the sideboard and become 80% capacity Dimir Tempo. You're never going to be as good at being Dimir Tempo as Dimir Tempo, which is that deck from the start. They use all 75 cards to do that instead of exactly 60. But something I figured out very early is that when you pivot into Dimir Tempo and you're playing Barogoyfs and your Animate Deads and half your monsters or all the monsters are out of the deck, you just can't cast the card Careful Study. It's so terrible. It's like having Faithless Looting in your deck if Faithless Looting didn't have flashback and also you have no synergy with it. It's just a lot of boxes that go the wrong way. Because the card Careful Study does the same thing as tapping Bazaar of Baghdad. Bazaar is draw 2, discard 3, but it doesn't cost you a card to do that. Careful Study is a card that wants you to draw 2, discard 2. So you lose the 2 cards you discard, plus the Careful Study. And Dimir Tempo would not play Bazaar of Baghdad if it was legal in the deck. You have to do something else to make Bazaar of Baghdad not terrible. And figuring out that we're not playing Careful Study was one of my very early and critical innovations. And then if we're not playing Careful Study, then the package isn't tight enough for days anymore, which is why there are 6 forces in the main. 6 forces in the main is also part of why there are 4/2 Atraxa over Archon instead of 3 and 3. I would honestly play 5 and 1 Atraxa and Archon if that was allowed in the rules. And I did consider some kind of silly bridge monsters like a Boron Oculus or Meringue River Regent as over the second Archon as a 6th threat that's also blue and also can play other types of magic than Entomb Reanimate. Like, it's fine to cast those things, but it's also fine to reanimate them. But at the end, I just went with the best monsters because we did really want to still be shoving and stealing game 1s. And then we figure out how we want to pivot out of the sideboard. And everything you do in the main deck, like the Boron Oculuses and stuff, makes your game 1 closer to Dimir Tempo than it is to Reanimator, at least a little bit down the spectrum. And I want to be Reanimator in game 1. And then the looting effects, the split that I ended up with, Tainted Indulgence is nice because it's an instant. You can set everything up in your opponent's end step so they don't have time to do a sorcery speed removal or cantrip in a certain way or reanimate your monster because it's hanging in the graveyard from a sorcery speed effect. But also Roiling Dragonstorm. The synergy with Murktide Regent is not to be overlooked. I picked up Roiling Dragonstorm a lot this weekend and drew 2 more cards, and that's just free money at that point. It's also very important that this is a blue enchantment, because Atraxa, you really want to hit Force Blue card when an Atraxa comes into play. You want to use all your resources getting Atraxa in, and then you want Atraxa to reload your resources and be able to protect herself. And having a different card type that otherwise could only hit Animate Dead be a blue card, it just increases your chances of A, getting another card. You've doubled the number of enchantments in your deck, and B, it slightly increases your chances that one of the extra cards you find is blue to go with one of your 6 forces. Yeah, this card was great. And in long games, Tainted Indulgence does turn on sometimes, especially post-board when you've juked, where you just get to draw 2 at some point, which actually almost got me in trouble in the tournament, and we'll talk about that during the rounds. But that is an ability on that card as well. So that's the list and how we got there. Look for that series coming up. For my tournament itself, Cephalid Breakfast round 1. This is one of the best matchups imaginable. Their combo is more fragile than yours. They are faster than you, but they need more things to go right. And with 6 forces in the main, and Atraxa being able to reload, and Wasteland can take out their Urza Sagas and stuff, game 1's a little bit stressful, but you can take it, and then you do a pretty big sideboard juke. My head just continues to be in the way here. Now my head is smaller. That's better. After sideboard, you get Engineered Explosives, Consigned to Memory, Brazen Bar, Mystical Dispute, 4 Fatal Push, Cling to Dust, 2 Orcish Bowmaster. And then if you want the Beargoyfs, like, you could board in 15 cards versus Cephalid Breakfast, while they still have to respect that you might try to reanimate them. It's a mess for them, and this is a matchup I'm very happy to get. Game 1, though, I got pretty lucky. I churned through like 15 or 20 cards without seeing a monster, and my opponent was starting to get something together. Like, they had a Saga that was about to tick up to 2. I think they had a Shuko on board already, and it was starting to get dire. And I drew for turn. It was a fetch land, and I just fetched a main face Undercity Sewer and spiked into Atraxa, reanimated it, then the game ended. And that's something I want to talk about too with these new builds. Like the old build with Entomb that only had 2 monsters. Let's say you keep a 7-card hand, you play a couple turns of Magic, and you haven't put together your combo yet. At that point, there's about 50 cards in your deck, and there's 2 monsters you can hit off of Sewer. 2 out of 50 is 4%. So 4% of the time, you spike a monster for free. 6 out of 50 is 12%, which is way more. 4% means 1 out of 25 times you'll hit a monster on a blind surveil. 12%, it's like 1 out of 8.5 times. That's so much better than 25. And with 2 sewers in the deck, you're surveilling twice per game. So if you hit a monster 1 out of every 8 or 9 times and you're surveilling twice per game, over the course of 14 rounds, you're going to hit a lot of monsters in the blind. And obviously, you're still more likely to hit anything else than a monster. There's the 88% in the other direction. But I mean, the smaller your deck gets, that's all based on assuming there's about 50 cards in your deck. If there's like 40, the number's a little better, you know? And so on. Blind hitting monsters is a big feature of this deck when you have so many that you can hit. But I did randomly spike an Atraxa in the mid game, in game 1, took that one over, and then I sideboarded in a million removal spells, and the sideboard games weren't super close. Here, I will throw back to that black scam player who I played in Vintage, who said he was really excited to play against me, but didn't want to play against me again. Guess what? I paired into him in round 2, and we had talked about his deck a little bit the day before. I knew he was on Jeskai Wizards with Felia, and I was able to just kind of dumpster him game 1 with a monster. Game 2, I did a partial juke, and we ended up in this weird spot where he resolved a Rest in Peace, which takes out all of the reanimate stuff, minusing Tameo, Murktide Regent, and bounce with one of my two Brazen Borrowers, the Rested Piece, and then all at once thread together a loot reanimate before they redeploy it. Or I have to win with Brazen Borrower plus Orcish Bowmaster beats, all of which are reasonable. Spoiler alert, I have not yet lost a Rest in Peace with this deck, even though I've had it in play against me, I think 3 different times against 3 different players. So you really do have to back it up. It's not lights out by itself. However, my opponent did resolve one, and I had a Tamiyo tick up to ultimate, and then drew half my deck. But that half of my deck did not contain a single Thoughtseize or Force of Will. And so I couldn't bounce and then fend off the reanimate and then play on. I had to keep cantripping, making my deck smaller and smaller, trying to dig for some protection to then remove the Rested Piece. And I also knew from an earlier Thoughtseize that my opponent had Ruination in his hand, which meant I couldn't just play out all my lands either, because there were no more lands coming. I had them all in my hand. I had to just kind of stop at 4 lands, even though I would like to have 6, 7, 8 mana to play on, get to the point where I'm hardcasting 3/3 Murktide Regents. Like, that's a perfectly fine win con. But if I get 6 lands ruinated, they're not coming back. So the game was still weirdly competitive after a Tamiyo emblem. We played on quite a while, but I did end up taking it. Round 3, I played against Blue Affinity, which is the deck that ended up winning the tournament. And game 1, I just sort of dumpstered them, did what I was supposed to do. And then game 2, I had a early Atraxa, but my opponent had a turn 1 Emery before I was able to get Atraxa going. And then Emery plus Pinnacle Emissary was able to generate enough blockers, and then I think bounced my Atraxa somehow, and then found a Graveyard Hate spell, and then found a Kappa Cannoneer. And it came down ultimately to like a miracle top deck Engineered Explosives to clear 4 1/1 blockers out of the air to connect with a Murktide on the turn before it would have been completely out of reach. Oh, that was a really scary match, though I did come away with it 2-0. Round 4 was a camera match versus Andrea Mengucci. We were at table 1, which is completely random in round 4 of a tournament this big, but it felt cool to be paired against Mengu at table 1. Dimir Tempo, dedicated Dimir Tempo, is one of the matchups I'm worried about with Reanimator, because one big structural change to the deck that might not be obvious, but is clearly true, is that without Entomb, drawing and discarding becomes central to the deck. Like, the old deck could work its way to Entomb Reanimate and then fire at high life total into a Bowmaster with no problem. If your opponent sticks a Bowmaster before you have a monster in the graveyard, you're going to have to take a bunch of damage to get it there. Unless you have the 1-up Bitter Triumph or you're able to surveil it away somehow. But most of the surveilling it away is set up through a Brainstorm or a Ponder, which also triggers the Bowmaster. Bowmaster is a pretty big nightmare. The dedicated Bowmaster strategies, which is basically just a Dimir Tempo right now. But our game 1, this one was so close and pretty frustrating, where I had a turn 1 Thoughtseize, which took a Barrogoyf, and then like 2 turns later, I found a Reanimate. Like, I pondered into Reanimate and tried to reanimate his Barrogoyf, but the 1 unknown card in his hand was Daze. And then I was like, that's fine. I'll just use Tamiyo to pick up my Reanimate and get that Barrogoyf next turn. And that turn, he drew Murktide Regent, which then exiled his Barrogoyf to cast it. So now he flipped it completely of, not only did he develop a Murktide Regent, but he took my plan to play his Barrogoyf against him. And then I was able to fend off the Murktide Regent with Bitter Triumph. But this was another game where I churned like 15 or 20 cards without finding a monster. And I'm sitting there with Reanimate in my hand. The coast is mostly clear. I just got to find an Atraxa. And then he plays a main deck Dauthi Voidwalker. And he just kind of laughed when he played it. He was like, I wasn't sure if this would be good anymore. And I was like, well, it's good against me. And that turn, of course, I drew Royal League Dragonstorm, which found an Atraxa, which I couldn't discard anymore. And then it spiraled out from there. Well, that was like 2 perfect hits in a row off the top that also required the payout of a main deck tech choice that may or may not make sense in the meta, but it was certainly good against me. And then game 2, he got me with the Hymn to Tarak technology. These Dimir tempo decks that were being played at Tournament Week in Italy. One of them had 3 main deck Hymn to Taraks that I saw. I haven't seen Mengu's list. I don't know how many he had or whether they were main or board. But game 2, you have to partial juke. And this is another problem with this deck versus Dimir tempo in general, is that my plan is to partial juke or full juke. Like the full juke gets you to like 80% capacity Dimir tempo while we're playing against 100% capacity Dimir tempo. And you're just 20% worse than their deck, which means you have to partial juke because you have to be like 70% Dimir tempo, play the Barrogoyf Bowmaster game, but also be able to threaten to do something big, or else you're just a worse version of their deck. But then you could do things like draw Atraxa, who you can't use. And it's really tough structurally to get over on this deck. And Mengu had this really good sequence where he was able to Thoughtseize me, strip a Brainstorm. He saw my hand was Fatal Push, Bitter Triumph. And then the next turn, he Hymn to Tarak the 2 removal spells out of my hand, and then just played out like Tameo, Murktide, Bowmaster or something, just like bang, bang, bang after he cleared my hand completely, and it was over from there. That is on camera if you want to go watch it. Round 5, I got paired into Golgari Yawgmoth, which was pretty exciting. I was worried at first because the cards I saw looked like Cradle Control, which is actually this deck's nightmare matchup, especially if they're still main decking for Endurances. It's just so hard to get over the top of Cradle Control at the speed that the deck has to play now. They have too many tools, and even if you do use all your resources to stick in Atraxa, they can frequently just beat it and play, or Natural Order for their own Atraxa, or whatever. It's just not good. But after some Thoughtseizes and some interaction, I realized that Yawgmoth was the payoff and not that it wasn't Cradle Control, though I was able to luckily apply my knowledge from Modern to know what to fight over. Like at one point I Thoughtseized a Young Wolf and I Force of Willed another Young Wolf, and then I forced a negation to Greensun Zenith for 1 that would have gotten a Young Wolf, and was able to just grind it over game 1. And game 2, we had an interesting rules interaction that somehow in all my time playing Magic hasn't come up for me before, where I basically Thoughtseize encountered all my opponent's stuff, but he had a Shifting Woodland that he could activate once per turn and do something out of the graveyard once per turn. And he copied Grist. And I was like, wow, that's a cool play. And then he plussed the copy of Grist and put the loyalty counter. He put a die on the land. And that triggered in my head, wait a minute. That was a Planeswalker with no loyalty counters on it. And I'm sure people who play a ton of Modern or whatever already know this, but if you copy a Planeswalker with Shifting Woodland, it becomes a copy of that Planeswalker at 0 loyalty and dies immediately. So we had to call a judge to clarify that interaction and then also clean it up because he had already milled over the card from the Grist activation. So we had to like back that up and stuff. But yeah, it wasn't until the die physically went on it and I was like, wait, that just went from 0 to 1. 0 mana Planeswalker means something. So yeah, don't copy your Planeswalkers with Shifting Woodland. And obviously that would have been a cool value play if it worked, but because it didn't work, it just like deleted the only thing he had going on. Just his hand was nothing. His graveyard was full and he had Shifting Woodland, and now he didn't have Shifting Woodland anymore either because it is legal to copy it. It just dies. So that was a little disappointing end to what was a very cool back and forth match with a very cool deck. Round 6, I played against Golgari Slow Depths, and this is... There used to be Turbo Depths and Slow Depths, and the point of all of these decks is to make Merit Lage and connect with it, but it's how fast it does it and what its interaction points are determines what flavor it is. And this opponent had Urza Sagas and Malevolent Rumbles and was going for like a really stable turn 3 Merit Lage instead of a super aggressive turn 1 Merit Lage, which is kind of the difference of these two decks. I didn't see anything like Life from the Loam to indicate that there was really lands stuff going on, but I did see a bunch of redundant engines and ways to make and protect the Dark Depths multiple times on the same turn. Another Shifting Woodland gamer, by the way. Our match was really cool. Our game one came down to I had Atraxa in my graveyard and I had Animate Dead in my hand. And I knew my opponent had Boseiju from an earlier Thoughtseize. So I was trying for basically the whole game to try to find a Reanimate or to get them to commit the Boseiju somewhere else or catch them on a turn that they had tapped out or anything. And it just wasn't happening. But then they made Merit Lage and I just had to kind of shrug and hope it worked. And my opponent had Yavimaya plus Lotus Petal open. So they did have Boseiju mana. And they just let Atraxa come into play. I reloaded, and then they went to their turn and Boseiju the Animate Dead to make a runway, but I had already found interaction to stay alive at that point. So it was, I don't know if they just weren't counting the Lotus Petal or wanted to save the Lotus Petal or thought they could grind through the cards with Merit Lage. And I don't know what happened there, but it was definitely a big miss that I was really lucky to get away with. Round two, we had a really cool, or game two, we had a really cool sequence where I reanimated an Atraxa, loaded up my hand, which did not include Brazen Borrower, which is the most important card in the matchup, and I have 2 after board. So I look at 10 cards, whiff on Brazen Borrower. He makes Merit Lage on his turn, main phases it to play around Wasteland, passes back to me. I do some cantripping, I still don't find Brazen Borrower, so I just ram my Atraxa into Merit Lage. He blocks, it dies. I gain 7, I reanimate it, I lose that 7 again. Look at another 10 cards, still no Brazen Borrower. He attacks with Merit Lage, I chump block with Atraxa, gain 7, go to my turn, reanimate it again. Look at 10 more cards, still brick on Brazen Borrower, but at this point I found enough Ponders and Brainstorms and Dragon Storms that I'm able to dig into the Brazen Borrower, and the third Atraxa, looking at 30 cards, finally got it done. But it was a really cool, just Timmy magic of gigantic idiots smashing into each other. Round 7, I lost to Doomsday, and Doomsday is a matchup I'm looking for. I'm so happy for combo matches. The 6 forces, 4 Thoughtseizes, I'm able to push Atraxor Archon in a way that builds up. Like, my push is, I can Tainted Indulgence, and like, what are you going to do? Force that when you're a Doomsday deck? You need that force to protect your Doomsday. So I get to churn, I get to do stuff, I get to develop. We built the deck the way we did to really cover the combo mirrors. And then the sideboard is here to shore up the aggro and stuff. But I am happy to see Doomsday in general. Game 1, my opponent had a Tamiyo on, I think, 6 loyalty, the turn that I developed Atraxa. And then my Atraxa found, or no, it must have been at 4 loyalty, because Atraxa would have killed it on the next turn, even through the plus bubbles. So yes, it was on 4 loyalty. I stick an Atraxa. I get Force of Negation blue card in my hand, and I pass. And my opponent on his turn goes Dark Ritual, I let it resolve. Doomsday, I Force of Negation it. And Negation is the perfect force because now Tamiyo can't pick up the Doomsday. And opponent goes into the tank a little bit. I'm trying to figure out everything that could go wrong here. I'm like, I could kill Tamiyo. The Dark Ritual, there's not really any high impact spells in the graveyard for Tamiyo to buy back. And I'm just like, I think I'm okay here. And then my opponent does some like minor cantrip, like something very, it wasn't as dramatic as a Brainstorm. I think it might have been just cycle a Street Wraith or like Sackle into Edge of Autumn or something. It was like some tiny play, and then draws for that one, and then minuses Tamiyo on Dark Ritual, then goes Dark Ritual Doomsday from a Lotus Petal from hand, and that one resolves. And my opponent goes to 8 life, and I have a 7/7 Atraxa in play. So I have 1 turn to hit my opponent to 1, which means they can't force, fetch, or Street Wraith, but I also have no interaction in my hand. And I have a single Roiling Dragonstorm to try to find some, and the Dragonstorm finds a Wasteland, and I Wasteland one of the mana sources, and I just have to hope that the pile is wobbly enough that that's good enough, because he's at such low resources. But the pile was like a super clean, like, double Edge of Autumn into Thassa's Oracle with exactly 2 mana, with exactly 2 cards in graveyard. Like, this pile loses to everything. I just didn't have anything. And The sticky part of this is because my force of negation on my opponent's Doomsday the turn before, I had the choice to pitch Murktide Regent or Brazen Borrower. Those were my two blue cards in my hand. And in my head at the time, I'm countering the Doomsday and I need to get this game over with. I'm going to keep the Murktide. Like, I fend off the combo here. Atraxa finishes off Tamiyo. On my next turn, I develop Murktide and I kill my opponent all at once 2 turns out. That's what I was thinking at the time. I did not account for the possibility of double Doomsday, putting my opponent to 1 and making a pile where they have to go off without an empty deck. And if I had pitched the Murktide instead of the Brazen Borrower, I could have bounced the Thassa's Oracle in response to the trigger and still won that game. So that one was really interesting, and I think that was like I don't even know if it's a 49-51. I think that's like a 70-30, 80-20. I think keeping Murktide there is right almost all the time, except in the exact situation that your opponent's hand is Lotus Petal Doomsday and they have access to their Dark Ritual again. But, I mean, that's the game we played, so I lost that one. I remember this match being really good, being really back and forth, and all of us making a lot of decisions in all 3 games, and my opponent making really good, clean Doomsday piles, making them quickly, playing really well. This was a great match, and I just remember being slightly behind in Game 3. I think they built a Doomsday pile that involved Cycle Edge of Autumn, Cycle Edge of Autumn, minus Tamiyo on Edge of Autumn, which also generates a mana because it's a green card. Cycle Edge of Autumn again, duress me off the black mana, then play Thassa's Oracle. It was a really cool pile, but this match was dominated on both sides by the card Tamiyo. No surprise there. The last round I played against Red Stompy. I won game 1. I just dumpstered my opponent with a big monster. They couldn't get through. I lost game 2. They locked me out under, I think it was a Trinisphere. And then game 3, we had this cool interaction that we talked about after the match where I had stuck a Barrogoyf, which was the best thing going on the board, but my opponent had a Broadside Bombardiers in play, and they had a Fable the Mirror Breaker flipping next turn, and they had a hand with like 3 or 4 cards in it. And they attacked with Broadside Bombardier. Post-combat, pitchcast a Fury, dealt 4 damage to my 5/6 Barrogoyf. And when they did that, I was like, okay, they're going to throw Fury to finish it off. But then they threw Fury at my face instead. And I was like, okay, now they have Fairy Macabre. That's how they're going to finish it off. And there was 1 instant and 1 sorcery in graveyards, and then 2 of all the other stuff. So they discard Fairy Macabre, targeting the instant and the sorcery. But in response, I'm able to brainstorm into their Chalice of the Void to get an instant back into the graveyard. And then Barrogoyf survives with 1 toughness. I untap, and Barrogoyf then takes over the game. And we talked about it after the game. And the right way to do that was to Fairy Macabre before you activate Broadside Bombardier. Like, he was worried that if he didn't deal 7 to me, he wouldn't be able to close in time. And from me, like, I'm a more conservative player, I would have wanted to make sure Barrogoyf was dead. But it turns out you actually just get the best of both worlds, because every part of that was an instant. Like, Fairy Macabre and Broadside Bombardier are both instant speed abilities. So play Fury, deal 4 to Barrogoyf, discard Fairy Macabre. If it works, great. Then you could 7-ball me. But if it doesn't work, then you could deal 7 to Barrogoyf and at least make sure that works. The opponent missed the nuance of that interaction, and that would have been pretty bad for me if my Barrogoyf died. So, close one. We're a few rounds into the video. If you're still here and having fun, remember to hit that subscribe button. And if you want to play what I'm playing, use code BOSH for 5% off your order at toamagic.com. Eternal lives here. Day 2, I made it at 6-2. Round 1 of day 2, so round 9 of the tournament, I lost to Izzet Delver, which was tough because in the testing, Izzet Delver is one of the decks that we had to beat. We knew it would be well represented. We knew it would be good. It's a popular deck. It's a strong deck. It was important that the decks we register can beat Izzet Delver. And game 1, they're basically completely ill-equipped for an Atraxa or an Archon. If you just get one of these things in play, you probably win. and they don't have a lot of tools to do that game one, especially if they don't know what you're on and they just keep a hand with some lightning bolts or whatever. And you can really steal game ones as long as you manage your life total and make good decisions to be at a point where you could cast Reanimate if you draw it. Our game one, I had another one of these decisions to make, which, 49-51, 45-55, who knows? But the game went pretty long. We're probably 5 or 6 turns in at this point, and I have managed to loot an Archon of Cruelty into my graveyard, but not an Atraxa. And I have the card Reanimate, and I have 1 mana left. And my opponent has 4 cards in hand. And I haven't done anything yet in the game that would test a daze. So I have no information that my opponent has a daze or not. And in fact, it's likely that they do. I have Force of Will backup. And the decision here is my opponent has Dragon's Rage Channel in play with Delirium, and I'm at exactly 14 life. And 14 life is a bad number, because if they hit me with Dragon's Rage Channeler, like if I pass the turn to play around days, then they take me from 14 to 11. I get to my turn, I cast Reanimate. It ignores all the dazes. Archon comes into play. I'm at 3, and they can kill me with Bolt. So I have to make the decision, do I want to try to push into their hand and be willing to Force of Will a daze and hope they don't have a second counterspell now and immediately lose the game if they do have that? Or next turn, I turn Daze off as a card, but turn Lightning Bolt on as a card. And I haven't tested Daze or Bolt. I haven't given them anything to Bolt, and I haven't given them anything to Daze, and they play 4 or both. So it's like, there's also the problem of if I pass the turn and they play a Murktide Regent to back up their Dragon's Rage Chandler, now my Archon, even if it gets into play and I don't die to Bolt, kills their Dragon's Rage Channeler, I draw a card, then I have to chump block Murktide with my Archon, which doesn't get me out of the situation. But if I could kill the Channeler now and then they develop anything, that thing dies at the attack trigger. And so it's so much better if the Archon is in play now. And I ended up making the decision to shove it, and my opponent had double daze. And I lost basically on the spot when I lost that fight. But it was at least an interesting decision to have. Game 2, I do the full juke versus Izzet Delver. Basically, every card in the sideboard comes in except for the 2 consigned memories, and all of the monsters, all the reanimates, or the animate dead, some of the reanimates. Reanimating Barrowglyph is so good, but all the monster stuff is gone. And my opponent, I was surveilling with a Surveilland just to try to hit my next resource. I wanted to hit my land drop so I could play into the mid game. And I milled over a Barrowglyph. And my opponent surgicaled that Barrowglyph in my draw step, which is tough because it's my best card in the matchup. And with no Barrowglyphs in the deck, now my win conditions are Murktide, Bowmaster, Brazen Borrower. And Murktide hits really hard, but the lifelings are really important, and these other cards don't hit that hard, and they die to Lightning Bolt, all the problems. But we have a showdown in my upkeep, or in my draw step, where opponent surgicals, I force, they pyroblast, I end up losing my Barrowglyphs, but my opponent is empty. Like, has no cards left in hand. I'm able to Fatal Push their Delver on that turn, and then use my Reanimate that was still in my deck. I was hoping to reanimate that Barrowglyph. I targeted their Delver with it, and then I flipped their Delver. I think I got 2 hits in before they were able to bolt it, and then we were both just kind of doing nothing. And it's one of those tempo mirrors where whoever draws the first piece of velocity is probably ahead, and my opponent found a Ponder, and then that found a Dragon's Rage Channeler, which Surveil triggers and cantrips, and just buried me from there. But it was a cool showdown over a randomly milled Barrowglyph. Round 10 was against 5-color Beanstalk, and this is a matchup where they can beat you going long. Even if you trigger an Atraxa, if they plow the Atraxa in response to the trigger, they give you some life, you get 3 to 5 cards in your hand, but they have Beanstalk going and Uro attack you, whatever, they'll just make that up. So you have to either get the monster down almost immediately, like turn 2 or 3, and send it and really bury them, or you have to be willing to fight over the Beanstalks and not give them an engine, so at least cost them cards to fight your cards. It's really tough. I like it more after board when you have Bowmasters to punish their draw engines and Barrogoyf to just increase your threat density. But this is a scary game 1. And I mentioned when I was talking about my deck that Tainted Indulgence almost got me in trouble once. And this is the match where that happened. Game 1 was super long, and we were playing in a sunbeam. You know, sometimes in a convention center, the window just lines up perfectly to just obliterate one match for one round. Well, that was us that round. I was like sweating out the back of my clothes, and like I could feel my neck getting sunburnt, and I wasn't 100%. When we got to this mid-game situation where I had a Tamiyo on 4, I had an Archon in my hand, and I was like, all right, let's try to make this work. And I minus Tamiyo, pick up Tainted Indulgence, I find a Reanimate, I discard the Archon, I cast the Reanimate, and my opponent's like, hold on, how many mana values are in your graveyard? And I was like, oh shit, I didn't even look. And we got to, turns out, I had like 6 or 7 different mana values in the deck, like almost everything was there, and it was really bad because that, although it is an honest mistake, and most of the time discarding a card is worse than just drawing 2, exactly this situation, getting exactly this interaction wrong, looks really bad. And I called a judge over to resolve it, and basically the judge was just like, oh yeah, okay, well, pick the card up, that's fine. And while, you know, I'm glad I didn't get investigated for cheating, that judge should have investigated me for cheating. That mistake is so upside in such a tight spot that I think that judge kind of failed in their duty to protect the tournament integrity by at least not asking a few extra questions. Like, take me aside, talk to me. I don't know. It was a mistake. I was not cheating at a tournament weekend, but that mistake in general, or in that spot, a really bad one. Luckily, I did not get disqualified. And then I also had a Thoughtseize in my hand and just Thoughtseized the Archon and did the play anyway. But it was almost a bad one, and I feel really bad about that. I also missed the Murktide Regent trigger when I picked up the Tainted Indulgence. Like, I had a Murktide in play, and it's just like, I played that whole turn like shit. It was really bad. And I'm glad I didn't get in more trouble than I did. Okay. Round 11, Cephalid Breakfast. This, you know, back in round 1, I said this matchup's great. Always happy to get it. And the same was true here. Round 12, I gotta tell the complete story of this match. This, genuinely one of the sickest, nastiest, most disgusting matches of Magic I've ever played in my entire life. I don't know what my opponent's on. Opponent doesn't know what I'm on. We both mulled a 6. My hand is kind of medium. It has an Archon and a Bitter Triumph to get the Archon in the graveyard, and it has like some cantrips and lands to figure out what else we're doing. And my opponent goes Ancient Tomb, and I'm already in my head thinking, okay, how do I navigate a Chalice of the Void with this hand full of cantrips? And then adds a Lotus Petal, and I'm like, okay, how do I navigate a Blood Moon? That's even worse. And then cast Show and Tell instead of Chalice of the Void or Blood Moon or anything else that mana represented. And opponent put in Emrakul, I put in Archon. They sacrificed the Emrakul to the Archon trigger. They discarded the last card in their hand, and then I won. And that was, I won that game without casting any spells on turn 1. And then game 2, my hand was Force of Will, 2 Atraxas, 2 Reanimates, a Wasteland, and then some other card that was neither a black source nor a blue card. So the idea here was draw for turn, because I'm on the draw, discard one of the Atraxas to hand size, and then I have Force blue card, that's the Atraxa, that can keep me alive through a Show and Tell, or I could just put in the Atraxa if I want to roll the dice versus a Show and Tell. And if I ever find a black source, I have 2 Reanimates. I just send it, flush out a counterspell, send it again, and I will eventually get this Atraxa into play, and I have Force backup. And I even have Wasteland if they develop an Ancient Tomb, then don't do anything with it. And it's like, I am rolling the dice on hitting one of This is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 16 black sources before my luck runs out on this hand. But I think it's worth it. There's enough upside here to roll the dice on it. And my first draw, my opponent goes like island cantrip or something. My first draw of the game is basic swamp. Just the basic swamp shows up in my hand. I go to clean up, discard Atraxa, and then my opponent goes to the second turn and has a Ponder, and then a second basic island, plays 2 Lotus Petals, and uses them to cast Blood Moon, and passes with 1 card in hand. And then I play basic swamp from my hand, I cast Reanimate target Atraxa, and the game is over. So I got insanely lucky. My 16 outer, because of my opponent's hand, became a 1 outer, but I already had it in my hand, so I didn't even have to force the will of Blood Moon. Just really disgusting stuff. But opponent was a good sport about it. Shout out to that player, because it would have been reasonable to be pretty mad. Round 13, I finally paired into the deadly, nearly unbeatable Cradle Control, and I had a turn 1 Thoughtseize that took a white of the Reliquary. My opponent had a turn 1 Once Upon a Time, which found Endurance. So they either already knew what I was on, or suspected that's what I was on, or were just patting their hand with interaction just in case. Like, whatever it was, they had a Once Upon a Time, it chose Endurance. And then I looted an Atraxa into the graveyard on turn 2, because I had the loot. That's what my hand did. Might as well set it up. I did not find a Force of Will, but I did have Force of Negation. I Force of Negationed turn 2 Green Sun Zenith from them, and then went to my turn. I had a Brainstorm looking for that Force of Will. It found Thoughtseize instead. So I Thoughtseize them. Let's at least get the Endurance out of hand while it's really a 2 for 0. And the Atraxa is theoretically worth a card, but I haven't committed Reanimate to it yet. So I don't know, whatever that math works out to. Well, they pitch, cast Endurance, pitching their own Atraxa. So now, not only is my Atraxa gone, but theirs is no longer even in their deck. It's in exile. I can't even randomly Thoughtseize it and take their Atraxa. So they did proactively clear my graveyard like they're supposed to. I got the 3 for 1 off the Thoughtseize, the Endurance, the Atraxa, and the card I Thoughtseized. And then I just Thoughtseized, or reanimated their Endurance, because it was just the biggest creature in the graveyard. But from there, I was mostly running on fumes, and that deck is really good at grinding you out. And then game 2, I just feel like, I don't remember exactly what happened, but I feel like it was never close, and I was behind at all points. And I think I full juked them, because I wanted them to have cards like, I wanted them to feel like they had to hold up Bajuka Bog or keep Endurances in their hand for stuff that just wasn't coming. Brought in all the Fatal Pushes, the Barrogoyfs, Bowmaster, Engineered Explosives. But the problem is that deck's also phenomenal versus Dimir tempo. So it's just so bad. And unless I want to put like 2 Toxic Deluges or a Toxic Deluge and a Perish, like I would have to make my sideboard pretty stupid to even have a chance in that matchup. And I think it's fine just being a punt matchup. Just try to fade it if you're in a tournament, because it's not that popular. But if you pair into it, you're going to have a bad time. And in the final round, I played against Mono White Energy. This is the version with like Starfield Shepherd and Felia and stuff. I hit a lot of blind Surveilled Atraxas this match. I think I flipped Atraxa over 3 games 3 times with just like end step fetch, get an Undercity Sewer. There goes Atraxa. There it goes. Game 3, my opponent took a line that comes up a lot as players enter Legacy. Like, I'm not implying that this is a new player who didn't know what he was doing or anything. It's just the a lot of people, it comes up, especially in my YouTube comments, of why don't you wasteland their volcanic island and then surgical their volcanic islands, and then they only have basic island and basic swamp or basic mountain to play the whole game on. It's like, well, because that doesn't really work is the answer. And you're spending a card to answer cards that aren't in play yet. And my opponent had triple wasteland. I Thoughtseized them turn 1, game 3, and their hand was like 3 wastelands, a witch enchanter, and some white cards, and I took the Witch Enchanter. I got Wastelanded, and then on the next turn, I developed a basic swamp and like did something, and then on the next turn, I played a fetch land, cracked the fetch, and they jammed Surgical Extraction on my Underground Sea in response to my fetch. Took the Underground Seas out of my deck. I got an Undercity Sewer, which surveilled, but then got wasted. And then I was able to find my basic island, loot away an Atraxa, reanimate it, and then we were off. And I can't help but think that would have gone better for my opponent if they had the Surgical Extraction still in hand, because I just developed my mana anyway. They did stick a like turn 3 or 4 Rest in Peace in this matchup, and they were pretty mad at themselves after the game, as I think that what they were saying is that if they hadn't just jammed off Wasteland on me on turn 1, I think they were saying they drew the Rest in Peace on turn 2, where if they had just developed mana instead of trying to aggro waste me out, they could have cast Rest in Peace on turn 2 and then just been off to the races, and they never have to surgical. They never have to worry about the Atraxa, and the Rest in Peace ended up coming down at a time where I had enough resources amassed where I think I had engineered explosives for 2 that I was able to set up like a 2-turn cycle where I play out the explosives and then blow it in their end step and then loot, reanimate all at once, and ended up getting away with that one, despite not having any Underground Seas in my deck. And once again, for the second tournament in a row, I finished 1 match point. 10-3-1 was the cutoff to get the Tendrils promo, and I was 10-4. So that was 2 tournaments, 2 long, nice opponents, great games, 2 long days where I did all that to come up 1 match point short. 1 draw instead of a loss gets me paid. 1 win puts me way into the money. And one thing about this tournament path is I lost 2 good matchups, and then I ended up 2 matches out of top 8. And that's just like something that is there in my brain. The decision to pitch the Brazen Bar instead of the Murktide Regent against Doomsday. Am I in top 8 if I don't make that decision, or if I make it the other way? The decision to jam into Double Days to play around Lightning Bolt versus am I in top 8 if I make that decision the other way? And they aren't haunting me, these decisions. They're just fun to mull over when you're thinking about, I was that close 2 days in a row. That discarded Mox Sapphire in that Bug Lurrus match. Would I have gotten the Trinisphere promo if I had just done the combat math correctly? Maybe. The ripped Tolarian Academy when they were super dead otherwise. And that one's not my fault, but it did happen. The 2 back-to-back perfect slow dredges versus the dredge player who was almost locked out of the game. All of these things, the decisions that don't go right, and just, like the good beats. Because I had some hot rips throughout the tournament as well. That one just cuts both ways. But being 1 match point out of the money on both days is certainly something that you think about on the flight home. And there it is. That is my Eternal Weekend Italy report. I was very happy with both of these decks. The process of building the Reanimator deck was a lot of fun. The way that I do my content, playing a different deck every day, that's fun. That's one type of format awareness. Like, I've played everything, even things that aren't real things. I've played those, and I know how basically everything interacts with everything. But really drilling down with a team of dedicated testers to get one deck really right for a big tournament, I haven't gotten to do that in many years. And it was nice to work on Reanimator with that group that I was working with. I fly out to Japan in like 3 days, and I'm not bringing my entire collection with me. So I have a very condensed decision time to decide what I'm playing in those tournaments, and good chance you see some similar decisions out of me. And things could change. I could look at the top 8. I have some videos to record this week. Maybe I'll fall in love with something else, but for now, my default, unless I'm convinced otherwise in the next couple days, is to just play the same decks again in Japan. I'm going to leave this one here. Shout out again to 4 seasons for the awesome tournament they ran, Eternal Weekend in general, the Italian Magic community, the European Magic community in general, everyone who came and said hi, had me deface their ponders and stuff. Always happy to meet people and have those conversations. I'm out of here. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Check out the Patreon to support the channel. I'll see you next time.